The homeless used to be drunks and drug addicts and ne'er-do-wells. You have people now with college degrees. They walk down the street, you meet them, they're nicely dressed, you can't believe they're homeless.
Women with children is the fastest growing segment of the population to be homeless.
We have a group of people in Washington who bail out Wall Street but don't bail out Main Street.
What we try to communicate in this section called Nations of Neighbors in Need is that in the U.S. and Canada we are just overwhelmed by the statistics. If every person who was homeless took a seat in a National Hockey League arena, we would fill every arena in North America 2 times. Nobody likes statistics, but they're part of our life and they help us with measurements. Rich Stearns mentions in his book, The Hole in Our Gospel, that 26,575 children die every day of preventable diseases. And I think he has a great line, is where is Anderson Cooper, where's the news media when you need him?
Let me just say, there are presently 26 million Americans that are unemployed. Last year alone, 3 million homes were foreclosed. 3 million families were just tossed out of their homes. Most of them did not know where to go. Some of them went to stay with relatives temporarily. Some of them were able to find other housing, but they estimate that about 20% of them are living out of automobiles, living on the streets. They're the invisible neighbors.
When we look at statistics, the ones that really grab me are the ones that say women with children is the fastest growing segment of the population to be homeless. When most people think of homelessness, they picture that long line of men winding around the block looking for what they call 3 hots and a cot. Depression-era pictures, you've probably seen them. Men in ties, in fact, waiting until the door opens so they can get in and get something to eat. These are people who were functional at one time and then because of an addiction became dysfunctional. They ended up at a rescue mission, found Jesus Christ, and got their life changed and worked their way back to functionality. Recently, another whole wave of people have come to rescue missions, and that's people who were never functional. They don't know how to read, let alone fill out a job application. They don't know how to add, let alone balance a checkbook. So the rescue mission takes them in and helps them with their life skills. The whole point of this section is not to concentrate on the numbers, even though they are massive, but to get a perspective on how widespread the problem is we're talking about.
Approximately a quarter of all the homeless people in America right now are children. I mean, this is a horrendous mess.
So even if you look at all of these numbers, it's so much easier to understand the poignancy of the problem when you look at individuals. So we've got 2 individuals for you to look at. First one is a young lady named Darby. Second one is a man named Clayton.
Darby Madison was a lean blonde from the Gulf Coast. An only child, she grew up fast and married quickly after her parents passed prematurely. By day, her young husband installed car stereos in a franchised shop. By night, he did the same, but for half the price in a friend's garage. Despite the moonlighting money, his longtime crack habit kept them poor. She only touched the stuff a few times, but equally suffered its consequences. In their first 5 years together, he was fired 4 times. Each release resulted in an arduous move. By the time they landed in Colorado, the couple had 2 children. Darby never considered her marriage to be in trouble. It seemed woefully normal, same as all the marriages she had known as a kid. Plenty of fights, occasional minor physical abuse, regular periods of estrangement. But one summer night, after an argument about there being no food in the house, her husband shoved her face first into the side of the refrigerator. He pinned her there with his shoulder, and then grabbed her tightly by the hair and twisted her head. With his mouth inches from her ear, his loud, expletive-laced rant crushed her spirit. She was worthless. He was leaving. He then kicked open the front door and disappeared beyond the stream of the streetlight. After several months of not knowing her husband's whereabouts, the stress of waiting for word while working 2 part-time jobs and caring for the kids got to be more than Darby could bear alone. She phoned a single aunt 3 states away. With genuine tears flowing, Darby made arrangements to sublet a bedroom from her. She used most of her available money for the move. The adult conversation was a welcome change, but life was still tough because jobs were harder to come by in this new location. All she could find was 25 hours a week behind the counter in a convenience store. And then life got tougher. The aunt received notice that their apartment complex was being taken over by order of eminent domain. All residents had 30 days to vacate. For 2 weeks they looked for an affordable place to rent, but gentrification was altering the area's economics. Midway through the 3rd week, a cousin in Calgary reluctantly agreed to take in the aunt, but made it abundantly clear that he didn't have room for Darby and the kids. The 4th week was spent sorting clothes and selling belongings. She and the kids stayed for a while at the Y, and then their money ran out. Never religious, Darby determined it was time to seek help from the spiritual community. She went to a church that reminded her a lot of the one near her childhood home. The pastor was friendly enough, but when Darby asked if the church had some place she and the kids could stay until she got back on her feet, he replied, "We're not really set up to do that kind of thing, but you might try county social services." Someone told Darby that if she went to county social services, they would take her kids. She instantly ruled out that option. Today, Darby's children are ages 7 and 5. The 3 of them are still together in Boston, where Darby bunks in with a man twice her age. She abhors him for what he requires of her in return for shelter, but it's better than the street. He makes Darby buy her own food. She earns the money by hustling people for historic tours in the city's North End. It's a scant, unpredictable wage, but usually enough for a few groceries to sustain her and her kids. She longs for a place of her own, a decent job, and a good school for the children. But her husband's words still resound in her head as if they were delivered just yesterday. And she now has come to believe she really is worthless. Sadly, Darby has no neighbors to convince her otherwise. Invisible neighbors. If you don't see them, you're not looking.
Clayton Talley was raised in the Rust Belt. Even as a kid, he knew there was no future for him in his formidable city. With high school graduation just months away, he decided it would be just as easy to survive in Saigon as it would in the hood. So he walked the stage and straight away traded in his cap and gown for a helmet and fatigues. 18 weeks later, the U.S. Army had him waiting in rice paddies. Despite occasionally being shot at, Clayton's first tour of duty in Vietnam turned out to be the best years of his life. With some extra training, the Army qualified him as a truck mechanic and stationed him at a high-security base. He made several good friends in his unit, and every weekend pass was a ticket to international adventure. Clayton re-upped when it came time, but his second tour was nothing like the first. He was reassigned. Fighting intensified Every day, he lived somewhere between total confusion and sheer panic. On a move north, his convoy ran into intense shelling and took heavy casualties. While Clayton was dragging a buddy out from underneath a burning chassis, a shell exploded nearby, implanting shrapnel deeply into his left leg, severing tendons and breaking bones. He did the hospital circuit in Vietnam, Germany, and the States, and served out his stint at a war base on the West Coast. He left the Army with a couple of medals and a noticeable limp. With his Uncle Sam no longer around, Clayton looked for a job as a mechanic, but his impairment and anti-Vietnam War sentiment ganged up to work against him. Prospective employers would say, "Boy, you were in the military. You were only trained to kill people. Go get certified for real, then come back and see us." Los Angeles was a big city, but janitorial and sanitation jobs were about all he could find for the next few years. On weeknights and weekends, he would meet up with other vets in a park. They would swap war stories and commiserate about the assorted injuries and misfortunes. It didn't help his situation, but it felt good to have people with whom he could share his despair. Clayton moved further east and landed a job at a feedlot, but the high plains cold got to him, especially bothering his bad leg. Someone suggested that rye whiskey could make him impervious to harsh temperatures and bitter winds. It didn't work, but he and Jim Beam became pretty good friends anyway. Sometimes, he and Jim would skip work entirely and spend the day together. Eventually, every morning started with a stern warning from his annoying boss. Clayton decided it was time to move on before somebody got hurt. Each decade to follow found him a little further east, doing menial labor for meager pay. But somehow, there was always enough to buy booze. The alcohol kept him buzzed and poor. A barroom brawl in Nashville landed him in the slammer for one whole weekend. During the booking, he heard the police throw around the words bum and drunk. Even in his stupor, it registered that they were talking about him. The next 48 hours were spent staring at the ceiling of a cell and wondering how he got where he was and what would be his destiny. For the first time, he saw himself as others did, and it was a dismal portrait. 4 years ago, Clayton moved back to Detroit. His old neighborhood was nothing like he remembered. In fact, it looked more like some of the bombed-out places he used to come across in Vietnam. Everybody knew he was long gone. These days, he sleeps in a shed behind an auto body shop. The owner doesn't bother him. In fact, he occasionally has Clayton sweep up around the place in exchange for fresh coffee and a few dollars. He often thinks of the irony of escaping his city, only to end up back there as a prisoner of poverty and his poor choices. He wonders if there will ever be another opportunity for him. But now, on the high side of 60, he seriously doubts it. Furthermore, he has no neighbors to inspire him, even if something were to come his way.
The section that we've been dealing with looks at statistics, the big picture, and it focuses down to two individuals, two very typical individuals. But what we want you to remember is that for all of these numbers, there's a name, a face, a person who was created in the image of God, who needs someone's embrace, needs someone to say, "You matter to me."